Star Citizen has been running with server meshing, multiple servers, all looking after different areas of the game for over a year now. We seamlessly transition from one server to another. We don't even notice it. On many levels, the rollout of this long-awaited tech has been a massive success. But has server meshing actually improved server performance? According to the devs, there has been a very substantial gain of performance on the game servers.
There's one more thing that server meshing brought us that's not negligible, is a very substantial gain of performance on the game servers in general.
When Benoit, the CTO of CIG, said this a couple of weeks ago, I thought to myself, is that actually true? Is server performance actually much better now than it was before server meshing? So I went big. I decided to collect some data, do a deep dive, and there's lots of fun stuff in this one. And ultimately, Benoit, well, he is right, but it does depend. Server performance does massively vary depending on a few different factors, which I'll show you. Before server meshing, 3.24 and anything before then, you wouldn't be shocked to see server FPS, Star Citizen's equivalent of tick rate, as low as kind of 2 or 3 server updates per second. 5 to 7 FPS for the server would be pretty standard, and if you were really lucky and you loaded onto a fresh server, you might occasionally see numbers higher than that, but not for long. Since 4.0's dropped, I've been occasionally glancing over at the server FPS counter, but even with server meshing, most of the time when I'm looking, that number is nowhere near the 30 FPS target that CIG is aiming for. When 4.0 first arrived, it seemed as though you were very often on a server running above 20 FPS. But now, a year later, I do regularly see kind of sub 10 FPS for the server. What is going on? Well, I mean, the obvious thing is that CIG has added more and more content throughout 2025, and the 10 different servers on each shard that CIG runs now, they've got more and more to look after and simulate as the year has gone on. And as more and more players join each server, you can see the server FPS number go down and down. Here you can see that I've loaded onto a shard. The shard has only got 85 people on, and in New Babbage, where I am, the New Babbage server, it's only got 16 people on it. And you can see the server FPS is pretty much locked to 30. Little occasional dips below, but pretty much 30 locked. We've skipped ahead now, and you can see that we're at 27 people, but we're kind of starting to dip below that 30. Jumping ahead again, now we've got 35, 37 people now on the server, and you can see that we are now hovering, well, it's a bit all over the place, but we're now kind of round 25-ish, maybe a little bit less. And again, you can see the effect as people join the server, performance tends to go down. Jumping ahead again, we've now got 76 people on the server, and you can see that we're now dipping below 20 FPS. Now, obviously, this will be different depending on which part of the game you're in, which we will show you in a minute. Significant difference in different parts of the game. But in New Babbage here, you can see that, yeah, 70 odd people in the server, and we're now less than, I think, what most of us were hoping for when CIG implemented server mesh. 85 people now on the server, only still 342 on the shard. The shard, in theory, can go up to around 700, but there's still lots of space on the shard for people to join. But you can see that we're now below kind of 15 FPS, and so again, we're just heading in a downward trajectory as more and more players join the server. And it's worth saying, New Babbage is obviously a bit of a hotspot right now with the event going on, where people are delivering things to New Babbage, and so you can see, and again, we'll see in a minute, that different parts of the game, depending on whether more people are kind of being directed towards that area, it will affect server FPS. And now with 112 people on the server, well, we're down to 12 FPS. And again, this is now getting to the stage where it doesn't look a lot better than what we had pre-server meshing. And the server continued to fill right up. So we're now at 170 odd, 173. And you can see now we're kind of bouncing 6-ish FPS, 7, 8 maybe. And again, this is kind of the sorts of numbers you would have seen before we had server meshing, kind of 324 and before that, before 4.0. Now, let's take a look at all the data I collected. I went into the game 96 times across 4 different locations, different regions, different shard sizes, and different amounts of people on each server. And a big thank you also to the people who join me on stream to add their own results to the spreadsheet. So we've got not loads of data. CIG obviously has all of this data, thousands and thousands of bits of data. We've only got a small snapshot here, but it does give us an idea of what's going on. First of all, here we go. This is the overall average of what I tested. So 17.4 FPS is the average across all the bits of data that I collected. And that obviously is a fairly significant improvement overall compared to what we would have seen before 4.0. And so when Benoit says there's been a substantial improvement, he then also at a different point said there's been an order of magnitudes improvement. It is fair to say that the average across all servers on each shard, in my testing here at least, with about 150 odd bits of points of data, it does point to the fact that overall the number has gone up fairly substantially. But it isn't quite that simple. What you can see here, and in a minute I'll show you that on a whole big graph with all the data on it, you can see that in different parts of the game, the numbers are different. So for Levski, the average is just under 30 FPS. And this is because, my guess will be, there's nothing in Levski. So our understanding, I think, is that there's now 2 servers managing Levski. So there's 6 in Stanton, 2 in Pyro, and 2 in Nyx, as far as we're aware from the last time they told us. And Levski, the one that you're on when you're sitting in Levski, basically is locked to 30 wherever you are, whichever region you're in, whatever time of day, however many people are on the whole shard. There's nothing really that seems to knock out the Levski server FPS. It seems to stay pretty consistently around 30. Like I said, because there's not really a whole heap going on in Levski or in Nyx compared to what's going on in Stanton or even Pyro. As the game, again, this year, they add the Rockbreaker stuff that's coming soon, as they add all the different things, the different stations, you'd expect that the number here will start to go down as they add more into the game, as has happened in Stanton and Pyro. So that's one. And it's fair to say that the Levski average is obviously skewing the results of everything else. So because they are all locked at 30, that is skewing the overall average for sure. Because my place, and this maybe is why I looked at this and thought, is Benoit really telling the truth? I do lots of testing in Lorville, and for Lorville itself, the average across all the different tests in Lorville on the different averages that I recorded is much lower. We're at under 9 FPS. And so I think that's why when he said that, I was like, is that true? Because my main experience suggests, well, you still definitely see lower than 10 FPS quite often. But that's often because I'm in Lorville. Looking at the other 2 major places I tested, New Babbage again. New Babbage actually was doing pretty well. Across all the data that we've got, we're averaging nearly 15 FPS, which, well, 15 FPS isn't great. Again, compared to the pre-4.0 days, before server meshing, it is good. You would have, back then, you would have taken 15 FPS if you could get it. And it's similar story for Ruin Station. So in Pyro, I was doing a load of testing there as well. We're hitting 14, which again, isn't 20 or 25, so it's not great. And I don't think anybody would say that that's an ideal solution to have servers running at 15 FPS, but it's better than where we were. Next, let's take a quick look at the region stuff. Now, this is heavily dependent probably on when you play the game, and the testing I've done here will have been at EU times, but you can see that the EU average at 15.4 FPS is lower than the others. But again, that's because I'm testing at kind of EU peak times, probably. You could maybe make an argument to say that it maybe for the Australian region, there's less players and therefore the shards are less full and the servers are less full and they get better FPS. Maybe that's the case. And some people will be tempted to look at this and say, well, maybe I'll just go and play on the Australian servers because of better server FPS. But again, from where I am, it's about 300 ping to Australia. So you get a whole bunch of different problems with it. So this is probably interesting, but ultimately the advice is going to be to play on your own region, probably in most cases. So then let's take a quick look at all the results plotted on this graph. And you can see here, you've got all these 30 FPS results. And most of those are actually, like I said, in Levski. And like I say, the Levski data points to the fact that server is always pretty much locked at 30. But what you can probably hopefully see here is that as the players on the server go up, so the number goes up here, the server FPS tends to go down. The line is kind of something like that. And so with 150 odd people on a server, well, we're getting on these results here 6 FPS. And so what I would point out here, and what I would maybe, this is where I kind of challenge what Benoit is saying. Benoit is saying it's a substantial improvement. I think sometimes and maybe often it's a substantial improvement, but there are plenty of times here when people have logged into the game to get this data, whether this was me or the people who were doing this on stream with me. They've logged into the game, they've looked at the average server FPS, and it's been sub 10. There's a big load of data points here, which suggests it's not like super rare to be playing on a server that's less than 10 server FPS. It's just not that rare. And so, yes, the average we're saying is around 15 or whatever we said. It's sort of here-ish, 15 FPS. But that doesn't mean that you won't be playing quite often on servers with fairly poor server performance. I guess what I would say here is that it's better. The server FPS and the server performance overall is definitely better than pre-server meshing, but it's still not good, is probably what I would say. What you'd be seeing on this example here with maybe 30 or 140 players on this server, and you're getting 4 FPS, that's not great. That is not a great time. There's some unacceptable results here ultimately from a real game. And obviously we'll say Star Citizen, it's an alpha, whatever. It's not kind of released in any sense. It kind of is released, but we're not at 1.0, let's put it like that. But by 1.0, I suppose what I should say, you'd be hoping that all these results that are kind of sub 10 for server FPS, you'd really, in an ideal world, be hoping that nobody is playing on servers that are running this poorly. Anyway, let's then look at this bit of testing. This is quite interesting. What we did here, again, this is on stream, a bunch of people joined me, and we all loaded into one shard, but in different locations. So we had people in New Babbage, Horizon, Port Tressler, Levski, everywhere, in lots of different places on different servers. And you'd be able to see here how different servers on one shard all compare to each other. Quite interesting. This first one isn't very interesting because we loaded into a shard which only had 140 odd people on or whatever. And so you can see that pretty much all of the servers are pretty close to 30. They're not locked, but they're pretty close. This one, though, is more interesting. So we then switched to US. That was in the EU one. We switched to a US server that was fairly busy, around 512. There's a couple of results here that have got 400 on because these guys, they spent a bit of time traveling to different locations, so we weren't all in the same place. And so the shard size had dropped a bit by then. That explains those ones. Anyway, what you can see here is that, like I said, the Levski results, you can see somebody's at Levski here and they're getting a locked server FPS of 30. Somebody else in Levski here getting 30, and Checkmate also somebody's getting 30. But again, depending on where you are in the game, you get wildly different server performance. You can see here we've got somebody who's at Crusader. It dropped down to 5 at the point that they took their snapshot. Lorville again down at 7. New Babbage is at 10. And so again, if all you do is play in Levski, well, you'll be getting loads of great performance. But in other parts of the game, the story isn't the same. Then we went on to another server here. We went to an Australian one, and you can see that even with only 190 people on the shard, with 41 people in New Babbage, that's dropped down to 16 FPS. And pretty much everywhere else is actually doing okay. Crusader at 20, not so well. But again, Levski's locked at 30. Checkmate's doing pretty well. The Stanton Gateway from the Pyro side is at 30. So again, the top tip probably here is get yourself on an empty shard. That's the best way to play this game right now from a server point of view. Here again, we went on to an Asia server. You can see that this is a kind of middle of the road range. We're at 350 people on the shard, and you can see that again, Levski locked at 30, Checkmate at 30, but the Stanton Gateway here now has gone down to 10 FPS. New Babbage is down at 15, 14 for those results, and Crusader at 30. And so the key thing I want to point out with this bit is that you could be playing with a friend, they're off over here, and you're off over here, and you could be having completely different experiences from a server side. And again, that's not ideal. So I find this all quite interesting. I've never really looked deeply into server FPS before, but I think it's fair to say that Benoit wasn't lying. Server FPS has increased since before server meshing, that's for sure. But again, like I've been saying, it's not like everything's perfect now. We've not reached the promised land of server performance. There's still a fair distance to go. And what does dynamic meshing do to this whole picture? Can they optimize things? Can they reduce the costs enough so that they can run more servers per shard? Because obviously one answer to this would be, well, we've now got 10 servers on each shard. What happens if we had 20 servers on each shard, all looking after smaller parts of the game? Well, surely that would increase server FPS, and I'm sure it would, but it probably would also cost double the amount. And so Benoit did reference cost in this SCL he had with Jared. He did mention that cost is a factor in this, and so yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see as 2026 progresses what will happen with server meshing. Massive thank you to all the people who helped out with this one. So we had lots of people on stream coming in, getting bits of data, putting them on the spreadsheet, and also those guys who came into those shards with me and went to different parts of the game. Huge thank you to you guys. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you think. Are you worried about server performance, server FPS, or is this something we just put to one side until dynamic meshing, the next Jesus tech, I suppose, that we're after? Do we just have to wait for that till we can really start to worry about this? I imagine they'll get there eventually, but for now, mixed, I think, is probably the right word for server performance.